I'm Eva Oh, and this is the Teakink podcast. I've been a dominatrix since 2011, and I would like to spill the tea on my life. Thank you for listening.
A bartender once said, I reminded him of his mother, who was a dominatrix. He was a perceptive one. This was in Sydney, maybe about 2 years into the job, my job as a dominatrix. And he was working at a bar that I frequented right downstairs from the house I was staying at, the apartment block. And I would go very late after work, after gigs, whatever. And I remember once I had maybe a client in tow. I don't remember who it was. I remember that they had darkish hair, and that's about it. They were just a pawn for my enjoyment, clearly. And the bartender was this sweet English boy who was there on his gap year. Just doing, a little time in Australia from England, in between working at the fruit picking or whatever. He did bartending. He was a pretty great bartender. But after this one time that I had a client there, just doing my thing, probably tormenting them a little bit, maybe prodding at them a little bit, the bartender the following time said to me, so that person that you brought in last time. What's the dynamic there? And I said, oh, what do you mean? What did you notice? And it's like, oh, I just saw that there was something sort of different about that exchange. Like, do you work with them? And I said, actually, yeah, I'm a dominatrix. So it was the first time after, I don't know, going in for months and months where I talked about work, normally just chit-chatting, sort of drinking in a corner on my own. But anyway, yeah, I thought so. It seemed very familiar. It seemed like something that I know because my mother is actually a dominatrix. I said, oh, that's interesting. Is she still doing that? And he said, she still has some people around, but not as much anymore. And I said, oh, so how did that come about? Like, was it a recent thing or? And he said, no, actually, I used to have a lot of what I kind of saw as uncles who would pick me up from school and do things around the house. And when I was about 12, my mother took me aside and explained that these were actually men who were serving her and they were doing these things to help her. And that was the first time that I had a conversation, I guess, with somebody who had been in a family unit where their mother was a dom. And actually, in the dungeon that I first started in, the daughter of the person who owned the dungeon, she would sometimes do reception work. And yeah, but we never really had a conversation. So this was like person number 2, but I actually had a conversation with them. But I don't think we've spoken so much detail after this about it, or at least I don't really remember. But that was kind of the first time where I saw this job in a potential family unit. Yeah. And since then, obviously now I know so many parents in the scene, and there's all sorts of different ways that people are making it work. But I wanted to use this episode to go into the process of how I started to think about motherhood. So, spoiler alert, I am not a mother. And I went through a process where I've decided that it's most likely not going to be the option for me. But we're going to use this episode to talk about all of the things that went through my head as the potential of that was explored. So, I had this story. I had this experience with this lovely bartender who was very kind to share a bit about their insight in their life with their mom, who was a dominatrix. But I kind of just kept that information aside and just did my job, and the years went by. Years went by. I never really thought about motherhood at any point in my life, except when I turned 35. And there's a lot of cultural talk about how 35 is kind of like the cutoff point of when you can stop having children, essentially. Your egg count goes down, it becomes harder, et cetera, et cetera. And I think that there's some research that counters that a little bit. But I was following cultural rhetoric, and I let that thought come into my mind. And I thought, okay, I'm 35. What do I do now? Because I'm kind of reaching a biological end, right, of sorts. So I need to think about whether I want to engage with this or not, because I like a life with options, and this option is shutting down. And I thought about who I could have this child with, whether I could do it on my own, what the structures of that would look like. And those were all quite interesting exercises, actually. As I was letting this be a conversation, it was amazing how many of my clients wanted to step up to the plate, which was never an option. Yeah, even though I maybe entertained it somewhat conversationally, just having that sort of an interaction with my client, one, in a sexual, penetrative way, was just not on the cards. And anyway, to have that kind of a tie-in would just not appeal to me, but clearly that was the appeal to them. So, I mean, there's the donor route, and then when you're doing insemination, there's a whole host of you've got to do hormonal injections, you've got to harvest eggs, you've got to go through a whole process with your body. And then we're not even talking about carrying the child, right? And I was thinking about all of this in pretty practical ways and going through potential scenarios. What could life look like with a child? Would I want to carry the child myself, actually? Could I get a surrogate? What would that look like? And I was living in Indonesia at the time. In Indonesia, what are the moral implications of that? How much control did I feel like I wanted to exert over somebody else's diet or lifestyle? It was just there was a lot to think about. And that wasn't even to the point where we were going to actually have a child in the world, and all the clients very happily, aside from wanting to actually offer their sperm, offered to be there for me, drive me, and be there for appointments and help me with injections and all this kind of thing. Lovely to have a group of slaves who were very excited to support this process. They were very excited to support this process. What is it about this process that's so exciting? Clearly not the words of somebody who wants to be a mother. to enjoy pregnancy. But enjoy. But injections, procedures, navigating all of these appointments, hormonal shifts, body shifts, potential surrogacy aside, like, and being driven around. Let me just turn off that heater that's probably been giving you some extra background noise. But all of this aside, the actual having of the child in the world. I think that actually, if I had this entity, it would be maybe lighter and easier, because I feel like I do have a lot of people who are very kind to support me. And most of them, like most of my clients come slaves, they have been fathers, definitely some much more absent than others. So I don't know how good a job they would do, but they would be told what to do, I guess, by me. And so therefore they would probably be better off than their first runs. But how I guess I sort of was envisioning this potential exercise and that I did bounce off of my slaves was like, also like, if I think about if I had a child and I couldn't also have it to be like the actual brethren, or is that the word? The actual offspring, yeah, of a specific slave, right? It would have to be of somebody anonymous in a way, if I wanted it to be cared for by everyone. Because even though I feel like they would probably care for something that is mine, they might feel a tension. And I would have to navigate a tension if it belonged to one of them. Not that it ever would. But it felt like this weird, like, paternal ownership thing that would potentially happen as I was fleshing out this idea with my crew. My crew of client / slave / driver / cook / yeah. So in some ways it's like it was this project that I would have had to have done. And I think that if I were to have gone through it, it would be anonymous, or at least anonymous to my slaves, donor. It would probably be surrogate in an ideal world. And it would be definitely a team effort. And I would not want to be the one feeding at all hours of the day, driving them around, like getting things organized early in the morning. I would really need like a team of support. And I mean, coming from Asia, you have family and nannies. And, you know, these things are a little bit more integrated in terms of help. But but could I trust even my slaves to do all of that? I mean, my main slave, for example, is pretty good at organizing things, but is fairly terrible at actually doing anything. So I guess like any potential partnership in parenthood, it's good to watch the capacity of the people you're going in with beforehand. Very closely, if at all possible. But as I did the spoiler alert, I decided against it. And not because I think that it would be impossible. I think that if anything, like I mentioned, it would be more possible for me because of how much support I have. even if I would have to dictate that support and kind of orchestrate it so that it felt like joint ownership as opposed to somebody else owns this child. But but I mostly decided against it because it feels wasteful, actually. Not only in terms of resources, because it's a lot of money that goes into artificial insemination, that goes into surrogacy, that goes into birth, that goes into actually rearing a child. Again, all the vocabulary of people who are probably not predisposed to having children. But I mostly did it because this thread that I've had since very young has continued with me. And this thread only got stronger as I got older and I was more informed, and also got stronger in meditation. There was a brief lapse that I will go into, but I will tell you that this thread is that I feel like existence is very difficult. And I feel like I'm in a lucky place now that I've been resilient enough to learn a lot and survive and use that information. But I don't think that a lot of people are able to do that as naturally as I have. And I wouldn't want to take the chance that I was bringing another entity into the world that would have to navigate that. And if they didn't have that capacity, because sure, parenting can help a lot and environment can help a lot. But I think that there are also some structural things that are happening in our biochemistry and how we are formatted that can make things more challenging. And I guess that I would feel guilt. Yeah, I would feel guilt, I think, because it's on me, And saying that, I feel like maybe I will get to a place where fostering might be an option. And I say fostering as opposed to adoption because I don't know if I'm looking for like a forever sort of entanglement, but I am interested and more in line with being able to offer care for my ability and my resources for a more independent entity. That makes sense. Yeah. Like I used to foster animals. I know it's different, but I really enjoyed that format, They would always send me the babies because I had experience with, things that need to be fed every hour or every 3 hours. But that was very sweet. I was so sleep deprived. But they're so cute. I don't find babies very cute. I think it's a good idea that I didn't follow through on this idea. But it was an interesting exercise to be had. And I'm wondering, like, who else goes through this? Like, is it just people with the uterus that got to think about this? Or is it the pressure? Is the pressure on the uteruses? Is that how you plural a uterus? Uteri? But yeah. Yeah, it was very interesting exercise to run through with the slaves and very revealing exercise for myself and also for the pressures that are put on those who are able to bear children, It's an interesting predicament that kind of pressure. But we're going to end this motherhood, this potential motherhood thing to introduce the next episode. Oh no, hang on, wait. So the next episode I'm going to do is on becoming mommy. And that's to do with getting older and people starting to use that term on me. But I forgot actually an important part of this whole like me running through the potential motherhood as opposed to being called mommy motherhood thing. But it was about the fact that I wanted, I also was thinking about the lifetime of this potential child of mine, right? And I was thinking, so at what point am I able to share about what it is that I do for work? At what point is it seen as appropriate or being able to be understood? And what about their environment, their friends, the school? How am I going to navigate that? Is that going to be something that's going to be really hard for them to navigate? It was just like, it was a lot. It's a lot. And it's enough to deter me, for sure. Lots of deterrence, over deterrence. But not to say it's impossible, you know? Like, I do have a lot of friends who are very kinky, who work in kink, who work as sex workers, who navigate parenthood in incredible ways because of the many ways that they've learned how to operate with people and how to talk and understand perspective and how they've seen their place in the world and how unfair it can be and how they can teach fairness. And I think that being a sex worker gives you a lot of incredible tools in order to be there for other people, including children. But it's still this stifling effect of societal stigma and shortcomings that is just such a nightmare to think about. So, well done to all the parents out there who are sex workers and who are practicing kink. And I feel like I've only seen a few groups who are supporting you, but I would love to see more. I would love to see like gatherings, parties, resources, books. Yeah, I would love to see more of that. And yeah, that makes me, that's interesting. I wonder how much. So I'm about to, as you've been listening to the first season, I'm doing this TV show. And I mean, it might come out never to in like years because TV works very slowly. So I'm learning. But I have cast a set of parents actually in it. It's like a reality thing. And I wonder how open they would be to talking about these things. But that could actually be an interesting idea for a future episode. But yeah, the second part of this episode got kind of fragmented, but I don't care. So stay tuned for Becoming Mommy after my motherhood. What do you want to call it? Musings. So thank you for sticking with me. Thank you for listening. And I'll speak with you